They didn't fire me like a man. They erased me, like I was a typo. Like I hadn't built the thing they were about to sell to the Department of Defense for 8 figures. My name is Graham Wells, 41 years old, defense systems engineer, co-architect of the most advanced micro-positioning unit ever integrated into a military drone system. And this is the part they didn't think you'd ever hear. I wasn't a suit. I wasn't polished. I wasn't the guy who networked at conferences or shook hands with generals. But I was the one who made it work. The one who stayed up all night writing firmware while the rest of the team argued about color-coded presentation decks. I didn't care about Spotlight, but I cared about the machine. And I built that system, line by line, circuit by circuit, thought by thought. So when they handed me the termination letter, not a conversation, not even eye contact, just a folded sheet of paper with a fake smile behind it. I didn't yell, didn't flip the table, didn't ask why. I just asked one question. Did anyone in this room realize my name is still on the provisional patent? There was a beat of silence. And that silence, that was the sound of them realizing they fucked up. We were in a soundproof glass room, top floor of the Huntsville facility. 4 men in gray jackets, 2 women from legal. No windows, no water, no thank you. One of them, Marcus Dyer, head of systems transition, looked at me like I was a technical glitch. Not a human being. Just something he needed to uninstall before lunch. We're restructuring. Nothing personal, he said. I stared back. Sure, nothing personal. Just 17 months of development. Just 3 security audits. Just 6 cleared compartments of classified access. Just the very foundation of the guidance system they were about to license. You know the worst part? They smiled when they said it, like they were doing me a favor, like I should be grateful to be set free. I didn't show it, didn't blink, didn't let them see what was building inside me. Because here's the thing, I don't do revenge. Not the way movies tell it. I don't kick down doors or send anonymous emails. I don't scream into cameras or cry into whiskey. I remember. And when the time comes, I move pieces they forgot were still on the board. If you've ever been backstabbed quietly, if you've ever been erased while building something great, hit that subscribe button. Because I'm going to walk you through every step of this. How they tried to bury me, and how I made sure they would never sleep easy again. Let me back up. I came to Huntsville in 2018. A government recruiter flagged my name after a precision control project I led went viral in the robotics community. Back then, I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Nevada, eating frozen meals and debugging code until my vision blurred. I wasn't chasing a title. I was chasing elegance, that perfect moment when the math worked. When the device moved like it understood what you wanted before you told it. They flew me out for one interview. And I never went home. They gave us code names. Argent 9 was ours, the 9th-generation motion vector system for autonomous reconnaissance drones. The goal: shrink the positioning unit by 72%, increase accuracy by 300%, do it under budget, and do it yesterday. I lived in that lab. Fell asleep next to power coils. Woke up to whiteboards filled with equations I barely remembered writing. And the others? They noticed me when they needed a fix. But they never learned how I thought. Never read the footnotes in the documentation. Never noticed the legal clause I fought to insert. That any attempt to manufacture without co-inventor authorization would trigger an automatic IP challenge. That clause, it was ignored, until it wasn't. There's something strange about watching people erase you in real time. One week, you're on every design call. The next, your badge stops working at the lab entrance. Your name disappears from Slack. Your Git history gets migrated. At first, I thought it was an error. Then I checked the admin logs. They had reassigned the entire project architecture, without notice, without credit, without me. And I swear to you, I didn't feel angry. I felt awake. You see, I didn't build that system just for them. I built it for what came next. And they had no idea what was buried in the code. What legal triggers were waiting quietly in the background. What encryption keys still pointed to me and only me. I walked out of that room that day without looking back. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I left with knowledge, with proof, with leverage they forgot existed. And if you're still with me, if you've ever been blindsided by the people you trusted, don't miss the next chapter. Because when the lights go out at the production facility next month, and the drones won't calibrate, and the media starts asking who really invented the system, they'll remember my name. Graham Wells, the man they tried to erase. The man who built the thing that now holds their future hostage. It started with a clause, buried on page 42 of a filing no one read. Section 7C, line 3. Commercial replication of protected modules requires written co-inventor approval. They called it boilerplate, standard legal padding. A formality, but I'd made sure it wasn't. I remember the day we submitted the provisional filing. The office smelled like burnt solder and stale coffee. We hadn't slept in 2 days. The team was celebrating, half of them were popping champagne with compliance. The other half were already angling for press quotes. I sat alone in the far corner, one hand on my mug, the other hovering over the final submission form. And just before clicking send, I opened the metadata, inserted the clause. Digitally signed with my DoD clearance certificate. No one noticed, because no one ever checks what the quiet guy touches at 3 a.m. You'd think in a world built on surveillance, someone would have noticed the fingerprints I left behind. But people like Marcus, the kind who climb fast, shake hard, and sell ideas they barely understand, they don't read. They pitch, they polish, they outsource everything else. They'd been planning to sideline me for months. I saw it in the access logs, the VPN handoffs, the sudden reassignment of system ownership to consultant Tier 3. Even the new engineers didn't look me in the eye anymore. One of them, Jason, I think couldn't even pronounce Kalman filter correctly. But he was already presenting my tracking algorithm like he dreamed it up in the shower. They had the blueprint, they had the prototype, they had the funding. What they didn't have was the right. After the meeting, I drove straight to a little law office 3 miles from base. Single floor, strip mall, next to a vape shop. Not exactly glamorous, but I didn't need glamour. I needed Eileen. Patent litigation specialist. Ex-Navy JAG. Sharpest mind in Huntsville for cases nobody wants to take, because they don't want to piss off government contractors. She looked at the filing, scanned the chain of custody, then sat back slowly. You wrote this clause yourself, she asked. Yes, and you were still full-time salaried when it was submitted. Yes, then they can't proceed. She closed the folder and smiled, not wide, not fake. Just enough to say they think you're a sheep. Turns out you're the knife. 2 days later, the first warning letter went out. Not to the company, to the subcontractor. The one contracted to manufacture the guidance units at scale. The moment they received the cease and desist, everything paused. Manufacturing, procurement, test phase. Because no supplier wants to tangle with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, especially not when national security exemptions are involved. They called it a misunderstanding, a temporary hiccup. I called it the first crack. Back at home, my email exploded. Legal HR engineering all spinning in tight loops of panic. One even had the audacity to write, "We didn't think you'd take it this far, Graham. It's a poor look for your future prospects." I didn't respond, not because I was being dramatic, but because I was finally listening to the silence. I'd spent so many years being overlooked, ignored in meetings, cut out of credits, that I almost forgot I'd been building something more important than a product. I'd been building leverage. And now they were sitting on a bomb. At night, I'd sit on my porch with a black notebook. No screens, no passwords, just graphite and strategy. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I wasn't even trying to win. I was trying to make it hurt just enough that they'd remember every system they built was made by a person, a name, a mind, a human being they shouldn't have discarded like a removable part. The funny thing about intellectual property is, you don't need an army to protect it. Just a line of text, typed at 2:43 a.m., signed by a tired engineer no one noticed. And that one line, it brought a $67 million contract to a halt in under 36 hours. You'd be amazed what silence and precision can do when they're aimed in the right direction. They thought I was gone, deleted from the servers, revoked from the access list, erased like I'd never been there at all. But they didn't know what I built. They didn't know the framework wasn't just code, it was a language. And I spoke it better than anyone alive. The first glitch came 3 days after my departure. Nothing dramatic, just a calibration error in the drone simulator. The target acquisition lagged by 1.6 seconds. Not enough to alarm marketing, enough to terrify engineering. Because in military-grade autonomous flight, 1.6 seconds isn't a delay. It's a crash. They triple-checked the hardware, swapped out boards, reran diagnostics, But the error persisted, buried in a module they hadn't touched, because they didn't know it was even there. I didn't sabotage anything, didn't write malware, didn't plant a bomb in the system. All I did was leave behind a question, a conditional statement. If the signature doesn't match the original compiler hash, then delay execution. It was elegant, invisible, legal. It wasn't a backdoor. It was a lock they never realized had a key. My key. The second glitch came on a Friday, and this time it showed up in the test logs. Packet loss on the control channel, intermittent, undetectable to the naked eye. But the analytics tool I had designed caught it because I trained it to look for exactly that. Jason, the junior engineer, flagged it on Slack. We're seeing intermittent comms flicker under high-load simulations. No one responded for hours, because they didn't know where to look. They had the blueprint, sure, but the soul of the system, they'd never understood it. They'd only borrowed it. You know what they say, people who inherit complex machines without reverence break them trying to optimize them. So they started reaching out, first through anonymous emails, then a phone call from a blocked number. I let it ring, watched the caller ID flicker then fade. They didn't deserve an answer. Not yet. Instead, I watched, monitored public IP logs, tracked mentions of my system on military procurement forums. Eventually, I found something funny. They had renamed the project. Argent 9 was now Halo Vector. New name, new logo, same broken engine underneath. Rebranding a missile doesn't make it fly straighter. It just delays the crash. They spun their wheels for weeks, brought in consultants, paid a former Lockheed engineer $450 to stabilize the telemetry core. He failed. Of course he did. Because the telemetry wasn't broken. It was asking a question. And no one could answer it but me. During this time, I moved in silence. No social posts, no updates, no contact with my former team. Just one thing: I sent a printed copy of the original compiler hashed to my patent attorney. Time-stamped, signed, in case things escalated, in case they tried to sue me for causing irreparable harm. But the system didn't fail because I broke it. It failed because they never respected how it worked. They'd copied the body but not the heartbeat. One night I got an encrypted message from an old friend on the periphery of the project, a name I won't write here. It said, "They're circling the wagons. DoD review coming next week. They're going to say you intentionally compromised the guidance logic." I sat in my chair staring at that line. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to satisfaction. They were afraid. Not of what I might do next, but of what I had already done. Without touching a single terminal, without lifting a finger. Just ghosts. Moving through a system they never fully owned. By Monday morning, they knew they had to call. This time, no blocked number, no assistant, no buffer. Marcus called me himself. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Graham," he said, his voice lower than usual. "We're encountering some issues on the operational side. That's so. We were hoping if you're available, you might help us smooth out the transition. Just some legacy handover. Paid, of course." I said nothing. "Then finally you renamed the system. We felt it was time to move the branding forward. You didn't move it forward. You stripped it down and painted over it." A pause, longer than I expected. "Look," he said, "we want to find a way to work together. You know how critical this is." I stared out the window. The autumn light hit my desk at a perfect angle, quiet, golden. I imagined their lab sterile and bright, full of engineers staring at error logs they couldn't parse. "You ever fix a car," I said slowly, "and the next guy drives it straight into a ditch?" I'm not sure. That's how it feels right now." Then I hung up. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it to let the silence echo. To let him feel for just a moment what it's like when something critical goes missing, and you're not smart enough to understand what. The ghost wasn't in the machine. I was the machine, and I'd simply walked away. By the end of that week, manufacturing had stalled completely. They didn't announce it, of course. Not to the media, not to the board. Not even to the department heads who were still pretending everything was on schedule. But inside they were scrambling. Production was already 6 weeks behind. Procurement had stopped responding. The subcontractor in Arizona, one of the few facilities certified for micro-guidance units, had sent back a 3-line statement. "Pending resolution of intellectual property concerns, no parts will be machined at this time." It wasn't a refusal. It was a freeze. An open-handed way of saying, "This isn't our fight, but we're not touching a live wire without gloves." What they didn't know was that I'd prepared the gloves a year ago. Back when everything still felt stable. When we were still taking team photos and pretending we'd all be working together for decades. I'd built a chain of custody diagram just for myself. Not for work, not for insurance. Just in case. It tracked every file, every version, every signature. From the first schematic sketched on my home tablet, to the final prototype board etched in the lab's cleanroom. I didn't share it with anyone, didn't print it, didn't email it, just stored it on a cold drive that never touched the internet. Now it was my firewall. I sent one copy to Eileen, my attorney. Another went sealed and time-stamped to the USPTO as part of a dispute notification. We didn't sue, didn't threaten. We just filed a single motion. Request for preliminary injunction on all manufacturing pending patent co-inventor review. It wasn't aggressive, it was procedural. And it worked. Within 48 hours, they received the letter. Official, federal, signed by a clerk from the Department of Commerce. I imagine the meeting that followed. The whiteboard full of timelines. The faces turning pale. The consultants stuttering about mitigation. There's a kind of quiet that settles over people when they realize the thing they built is about to implode. I wasn't there, didn't need to be, because by then the system had already done the speaking. They tried contacting me again, this time through an independent liaison. Some retired colonel who now worked as a middleman for high-risk contractors. He called my lawyer, offered a number, 7 figures. Clean, fast, transfer all rights, end the dispute, sign the paper, walk away. I said no. Not because of pride. Not even because of principle. I said no because I knew something they didn't. Money is easy, correction is not. If I took the deal, they'd learn nothing. They'd pay off one mistake and make 10 more. But if I held the line, if I made them bleed through delays and legal fees and public tension, they'd have to face what they tried to bury. Me. The first leak came from inside. I don't know who did it. Maybe someone in legal. Maybe a quiet engineer with a conscience. But within days, a redacted version of the freeze order landed in a defense contractor forum. Major guidance project halted. Co-inventor dispute. Compliance chaos incoming. Within hours, people were speculating. Lockheed, Raytheon, Northrop. But one post anonymous hit closer to the truth. Argent 9, now Halo Vector. Huntsville team. Source says original architect was forced out and left a kill switch in the logic. They weren't far off. I hadn't left a kill switch. I left a fingerprint. And they built everything on top of it. Now it was smudging the entire blueprint. I didn't want headlines. Didn't want praise. But I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story. They tried once on a company blog. A soft PR piece. In light of recent project realignments, we're collaborating with former contributors to ensure a smooth continuation of our innovation. Former contributors. That's what I was now. I sent Eileen the article. She laughed under her breath. That counts as a public statement. Want me to respond? No, I said. Let them dig their own hole. I'll send the shovel. It was around this time that something shifted. Not in me, in them. Their tone changed. Emails came more carefully worded. Phone calls came from higher offices. An assistant from the Department of Defense emailed my attorney directly. We've been informed of the pending IP freeze. We request a technical briefing on your client's role in the initial development cycle. Not accusation, not defense. Just interest, recognition. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about contracts anymore. This was about credibility. About the thing they'd tried to steal becoming the thing they now needed to justify. I took a walk that night. No destination, just motion. The sky was clear. The stars hung heavy over Huntsville, quiet witnesses to machines and men and the things they build to control each other. I thought about the lab, about the silence in that glass room when I mentioned the patent, about the way Marcus blinked twice the only time he looked afraid. I remembered the engineer who asked me back in year 1, "Why do you care about who gets credit? If it works, isn't that enough?" I didn't answer him then, but I have an answer now. Credit isn't about ego, it's about truth. And truth matters most when people start lying with confidence. They didn't realize the system could feel betrayal. Not in the way people do. Not with anger or sadness. But with logic. Pure, merciless logic. Because every system reflects its architect. And I never built anything that didn't know how to defend itself. It started small. A checksum mismatch on Module 3A. Insignificant on paper. Enough to bypass most diagnostic thresholds. but not enough to pass a field test. The engineers assumed it was corrupted during firmware update. They reflashed it, twice, but it kept coming back. Same mismatch, same error. Because it wasn't a bug. It was a question. Where's the signature? The signature was mine, encrypted, embedded deep within the sublayer they'd overlooked. Back when we were first building the system, I had a habit of adding what I called whispers. Tiny fragments of logic designed to test integrity to validate that what we were building hadn't been tampered with. They weren't meant to be traps. They were meant to be safeguards. But if you remove the person holding the keys, the system assumes something's wrong. So it whispers. And then it waits. And when no one responds, it asks again louder. They ignored the second error. Then the third. Then the cascade began. One unit failed in thermal simulation. Another refused to stabilize during altitude trials. A third wouldn't even boot. Each one stalled for a different reason. But the cause was always the same. The system no longer trusted its handlers. They called it instability, inconsistency, unforeseen behavior. But it wasn't unforeseen. I foresaw all of it. I wrote the conditions myself. If signature mismatch plus hardware revision threshold, then quarantine. Quarantine, a word that scared the hell out of military auditors. By the end of the month, 6 test units had been pulled. 5 reported non-fatal software stalls. 1 refused to run at all. Jason, the kid who inherited my lab chair, had a meltdown in the company group chat. This isn't a system bug. It's reacting like it's been sabotaged from the inside. He was half right. It hadn't been sabotaged. It had been protected. And now it was defending itself from people who didn't speak its language. The new systems analyst, a man flown in from DC, contacted me through LinkedIn. Didn't even try to hide it. Message said, "You don't know me. I'm not here to argue. But I've seen systems before that fight back. I've never seen one that does it this quietly. Whatever you put in, it's not just smart. It's deliberate." He ended the message with a question. "Did you expect this?" I didn't reply. Because the answer was yes, and no, and maybe. I didn't expect them to move so fast after they pushed me out. Didn't expect them to forget what it meant when code starts breaking in patterns. But I built those patterns, which means I understood what was coming next. Back inside the company, they were drowning in protocol. The legal freeze was one thing, but now the systems weren't cooperating. Every delay required a justification. Every unit that failed had to be documented, reviewed, explained. And they couldn't explain anything, because their explanations were built on surface knowledge. They understood what the system did, not what it believed. And yes, I use that word intentionally, because belief in code is just conditional logic. And mine had very clear conditions. If access chain original structure, then trust erasure false. And if trust erasure false, operations stall. I hadn't meant for it to unfold this way. Not exactly. Back then, the whispers were just that small tests. A way to make sure we didn't get sloppy. But systems evolve, especially ones built to learn. And when the hands that shaped them disappear, they don't forget. They adapt. There was a moment years ago when we first tested the motion engine in real time. I watched the drone hover in perfect balance, adjusting with precision that didn't feel mechanical. It felt instinctive. One of the junior analysts turned to me and said, "It's like it knows what it wants to do." I laughed then, but now I wasn't laughing, because the thing we'd built, it remembered the shape of its creator, and it didn't recognize the hands touching it now. That's when the Pentagon called. Not through the company, not through the liaison, direct. They wanted a briefing. Technical, confidential. They weren't asking me to take sides. They were asking a simpler question. "Can you explain why the system is rejecting its own team?" I didn't say yes, didn't say no. I just asked for the meeting to be recorded. Not for legal, not for leverage. For history. Because if anyone ever asked what really happened with Halo Vector, they wouldn't find a press release. They'd find a system that rejected its own future because the men steering it had forgotten the past. It didn't take long for the story to leak. It started as a whisper on defense contractor forums, then a post on a civilian tech blog. And by the time a freelance journalist reached out, the rumor had mutated into something bigger. DoD drone contract frozen due to internal sabotage. The word they used was sabotage. But that wasn't true. There was no sabotage, no malicious code, no traps. There was only truth, and the system enforcing it on its own terms. I didn't want to speak to the press. I never cared about headlines. Never wanted to be some symbolic figure holding up a banner that said justice for engineers. I just wanted credit, and respect, and boundaries that couldn't be bulldozed by people who saw developers as interchangeable parts. But silence is a funny thing. Too much of it and people fill in the blanks for you. They make you into a villain, or a hero, or a myth. And in this case, the myth was spreading fast. A journalist from Virginia reached out directly, said she'd been following the procurement freeze, that she'd cross-referenced internal staff from Halo Vector with prior filings from the USPTO. Said she found my name. Then she said something that made me pause. You're not listed on the project anymore, but you're still on the patent. That's unusual. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out my window, watched the trees shifting under a gray sky. My name, still there. They could cut me out of the meetings, delete my access, scrub my login credentials. But they couldn't rewrite the invention. Because that kind of truth lives deeper than documents. It lives in function, in design, in form that cannot exist without you. I told her off the record. I didn't sabotage anything. I just built something with rules. They broke those rules. She asked if I'd be willing to go on record. I said no. I wasn't ready. I didn't need attention. I needed them to feel it. To watch their system buckle under their own hubris. To realize that talent doesn't work well with chains around its neck. Meanwhile, inside the company, panic took on a different flavor. I heard from a friend, one of the last decent ones still there. She told me Marcus was under investigation. Not by the company, by federal compliance. Apparently, he'd greenlit production, knowing the patent wasn't fully clear. Pushed through approvals without legal review. Told procurement to proceed verbally. I'd seen this kind of thing before. Shortcuts wrapped in charisma. Mistakes passed off as urgency. And now that urgency was burning a hole in the hull. The blog posts turned into tweets. Tweets turned into podcasts. Podcasts into local coverage. Still no one said my name. But the silence was getting thinner. Then came the headline. The engineer they tried to erase is a forgotten inventor, holding up a $67 million drone project. No photo, no source. Just a suggestion, a shadow. And that was enough. The board called an emergency session. 3 executives flew down from DC. Internal memos leaked. They were preparing a statement. They reached out again. Not through lawyers this time. Through someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My old supervisor. Not the one who betrayed me, the one who trained me. She was direct. Graham, they want to make this go away. I said they can't. They'll make you an offer. They already did. Silence. And then she said something I didn't expect. They're not just afraid of the system failing. They're afraid people will realize they didn't know how it worked to begin with. That was the core of it. Not money, not speed, not even the lost contract. Reputation. Because the moment the public saw that the men running Halo Vector didn't understand the machine they were selling, the whole illusion shattered. They didn't just fire an engineer. They fired the keystone of the entire structure. And now the structure was groaning, swaying, cracking in slow motion. I went for a walk the night that article dropped. Same road I'd walked the night the freeze was issued. But this time the air felt different. Not cleaner, not calmer. Just settled. As if the story was no longer just mine. As if the machine itself had spoken enough, and now the world was starting to listen. I still hadn't said a word publicly. Not on record, not in print, not to anyone except my attorney and a few people who knew the full arc. But I could feel it. The gravity shifting. The truth surfacing. Bit by bit. Line by line. Like code compiling itself into something undeniable. And for the first time in a long while, I slept through the night. Not because I had won, but because they had finally stopped pretending I never existed. There's a price for staying quiet too long. You don't feel it at first. At first, silence feels like protection, like armor. A wall you can control, no questions, no interviews, no spotlight. But silence doesn't last. Not when the truth's leaking out from every corner. And soon people don't just wonder what happened. They wonder why you're not saying anything at all. The day after that article dropped, the calls started. Not from reporters, from people I hadn't heard from in years. Former teammates, distant colleagues, old professors who suddenly remembered how gifted you always were. They all wanted the same thing, a comment, a quote, a signal. Some of them meant well. Some just wanted to say they were the first to reach out in case this thing became historic. I didn't answer most of them, but one voicemail stuck. Graham, If you don't speak up soon, someone else is going to speak for you. They weren't wrong. There was already a rumor floating that I had sabotaged the system intentionally. Another that I was trying to extort the company. Another that I'd gone off-grid for mental health reasons. None of it true, all of it predictable, because that's how institutions protect themselves. When logic fails, they rewrite the narrative. They turn facts into fog, turn silence into guilt. But something deeper gnawed at me. It wasn't the damage to my name. It was the realization that maybe someone else, someone younger, someone watching all this from the outside might learn the wrong lesson. That building something incredible didn't matter. That truth could be overwritten. That systems didn't remember their architects. And if I let that idea stand, then all of this would have been for nothing. So I wrote something. Just a short post. No manifesto, no accusations. Just one sentence. If a machine you built stops working when you're removed, maybe you weren't just a part of the system. Maybe you were the system. No hashtags, no tags, no link. Just the words. And it spread. Fast. Because people recognized it. Not just engineers. Teachers. Designers. Writers. Nurses. Anyone who's ever built something that others took credit for then broke when they tried to run it without you. And if you've made it this far into this story, if you feel that low, steady hum in your chest, that quiet fire of someone who's been underestimated, then maybe this story is yours too. Subscribe. Not because this is entertainment, but because this happens every day in every industry, and someone needs to say it out loud and all the way through. You've seen the surface. Now it's time to see the whole machine. Back in the real world, the company made its move. They issued a public statement. We regret the miscommunication and are actively working with all relevant parties to resolve outstanding concerns regarding project authorship. They never used my name, not once, because saying my name meant giving me space. And giving me space meant admitting they couldn't do it without me. They still hadn't figured it out. I didn't want space. I wanted the truth. Unvarnished, undeniable, unforgettable. My attorney got a call the same day. From the Department of Defense, not a clerk, a policy director. They were no longer asking for a briefing. They were scheduling one. 2 days, classified room, Washington, D.C. They weren't trying to make this go away anymore. They were preparing for the possibility that they'd backed the wrong team. I stared at the email confirmation that night. Not with fear, not even satisfaction. Just weight. The weight of knowing what it took to get here. The weight of silence, and what happens when you finally break it. And the deeper weight of what this story might become. Because this was no longer about contracts, or patents, or systems that stalled in simulation. This was about voice. Who gets to own a thing once it's built? Who gets to define the legacy of a system? And if it's not the creator, then who is it? The room was colder than I remembered. Not literally. The thermostat probably still sat at 72 like always. But there's a certain kind of cold that doesn't come from air, it comes from memory. From silence that's been left to harden. From faces that once smiled at you like teammates, and now look away like they're afraid you'll break something just by being present. The DC building wasn't unfamiliar. I'd been there before. Once 2 years ago during a technical deep dive for a joint capabilities pitch. Back then, I stood in front of brass and black suits, explaining why our guidance system could outperform anything currently in production. I didn't wear a tie that day. I wore a lab coat with 3 Sharpie marks on the sleeve, and they listened. Because results speak louder than fashion. This time there was no coat, just a plain gray shirt, a digital badge that read, Temporary Technical Advisor, Level 3 Clearance, and the weight of knowing they now needed answers only I could give. 3 people were in the room, a colonel with a face like cracked concrete, a civilian analyst with the kind of silence that says I've read everything, and a woman in a navy blazer who introduced herself only as policy counsel. They didn't waste time. Mr. Wells, can you confirm your role in the development of the Halo Vector Guidance System? I nodded. I didn't name it that, but yes. Can you verify whether your name remains on the intellectual property filing? I can. It does. Are you aware of recent system failures linked to telemetry instability and code mismatch? I'm aware of what you'd call failures. I'd call them safeguards doing their job. They looked at each other. A pause. Not confusion. Comprehension. They were realizing this wasn't sabotage. It was structure. Built in. Deliberate. And conscious. They asked me to walk them through the safeguards. Not in abstract. In code. So I did. For 3 hours, I reconstructed the architecture from memory, explained why the logic trees were designed to distrust unauthorized manipulation, explained the compiler hashes, the biometric keys that had been tied to my identity and never reassigned properly. I showed them how the system was working as intended. The problem wasn't the system. The problem was who they gave it to. When I finished, the colonel asked the question I'd been expecting. Can you fix it? I didn't answer right away, because it wasn't the right question. I could make it function again, I said, but it wouldn't be yours. Not really. It would still be mine. And systems don't run well when they're pretending to belong to the wrong architect. Another pause. The room felt heavier. Would you consider returning to the program in an official capacity? No. Why not? Because I'm not coming back to rebuild something you already broke. I'm here to tell you what still works, and what doesn't. When the meeting ended, they escorted me out the side entrance. No fanfare, no handshake. Just a quiet nod from the analyst as he gathered his notes. That was enough. He understood. This wasn't about gratitude. This wasn't even about resolution. This was about recalibration. Making sure the system they'd tried to control could still be salvaged from the pieces they didn't understand. On the train back to Virginia, I stared at my reflection in the window. For the first time in months, I didn't look like someone fighting for relevance. I looked like someone already vindicated. The machine had spoken, the filings had held, the silence had done its damage. And now they were back at my door. Not because they respected me, not because they feared me, but because they needed me. And that meant the system still knew whose hands had built it. Later that week, I got an email. Subject line, Internal Policy Review, Attribution and Rights Recognition. Attached was a document. 17 pages, drafted by their legal team. At the top, Graham Wells, Co-Inventor Recognition and Oversight Addendum. I didn't smile, didn't laugh, didn't forward it to anyone. I just read it, line by line, clause by clause, because this wasn't a trophy. This was a blueprint, not for the machine, for how systems should treat the minds that built them. You don't always know when you've started a chain reaction. Sometimes you light the fuse and walk away thinking the fire will burn in one direction. But real systems don't obey the neat lines we draw on paper. They ripple, they reflect, they echo. And soon, what started as a single line of code becomes something much bigger than you ever meant it to be. 2 weeks after the meeting in DC, I started getting messages from people I didn't know. Not journalists, not lawyers, engineers. From Boston, San Diego, Brussels, Osaka. One by one the stories came in. Short, clipped, almost apologetic. Saw your name on the review docket. Thought you should know they did the same to me in 2019. We wrote the sensor layer at my last company. They filed the patent without us. Thought I was the only one who cared. Nobody ever believes you until the product fails. That's when they remember who built the engine. No exaggeration, no drama. Just facts, quiet ones, and heavy. Like steel dropped onto concrete. It hit me differently than I expected. I wasn't proud, wasn't angry, wasn't even surprised. I just felt seen, for the first time maybe ever. Because all this time I thought the system had erased me like a misprint. But now I saw there were entire archives of people just like me, erased in silence, built into machines that no longer spoke our names. But the machines still remembered, and now the people were starting to too. I got one message from a woman at a defense robotics firm in Canada. She said she'd written the first version of an adaptive terrain algorithm. Revolutionized mobility across shifting ground. Then one morning, her access badge stopped working. The project moved forward without her. She couldn't afford to fight it. She just ended with, I still have the original line. It doesn't work right when they change it. It jerks. It drifts. Because they never understood why the center pivot delay mattered. It was like listening to my own ghost. I printed some of those messages. Not to share, not for court. Just to hold them. Ink, paper, weight. Because when systems forget your name, sometimes you have to see it written again, even if it's someone else's story, just to believe your own really happened. Inside the company, I heard things were unraveling. Marcus took a leave of absence. Officially for personal reasons. Unofficially, they were auditing every project he'd ever approved. The project manager who'd replaced me was reassigned. Jason quit. The name Halo Vector had gone silent in internal memos. No press, no celebration, just redirection. They didn't shut it down. But they no longer called it innovation. They called it a complex transitional asset with unresolved attribution architecture. That's what I was now, an unresolved attribution. Some nights I pulled up the diagnostic tools I'd built during those first few months on the project. They were still online, still functional, running passive traces waiting for a system that needed correction. And now and then I'd see them blink. Once, twice, ping, a minor flag, an echo. Some fragment of the original system reaching out like a hand in the dark, still looking for the one who knew how it worked. Not because it was failing, but because it was alone. I think that's what most people don't understand. We don't build systems to last. We build them to remember. We code assumptions. We leave markers. We write not just functions, but fingerprints. And when someone tries to strip them out when they overwrite the DNA just to claim authorship, the system doesn't go quietly. It groans. It resists. It leaves behind pieces of truth too precise to be coincidence. One night I got a message I'll never forget. Just 5 words, from someone anonymous. "You built more than hardware." I stared at it for a long time, because maybe that's the part I never meant to do. Maybe all I wanted was to build clean motion, precision, accuracy. But instead I built a language, a system that could speak without me. And when they tried to shut me out, it spoke louder. They invited me back. Not formally, not with contracts or handshakes or press. Just a short encrypted message from the DoD project lead. "Full system field trial. Your presence recommended. System requests your signature." That last line stopped me cold. The system requests your signature. It shouldn't have. Not technically. Not unless something had triggered the identity filter, something deep beyond default fail-safes. Something embedded in the flight core itself. Something only I would have known to leave there. I flew in under a different name, just like they asked. Minimal attention, no badge, no escort. Just a plain van, a silent driver, and a black case with my old interface tool tucked inside. When we pulled up to the test site, I saw it. The platform, my platform, alive. 4 black fins, angled smart, motion still, waiting like an animal that knew it was being watched. I hadn't seen it since they renamed it. Didn't matter. They could call it whatever they liked. I knew what it was. The same way you recognize the walk of a child you haven't seen in years. That slight forward lean, that balance in the knees, that hesitation in the right turn. It wasn't just code. It was memory, and it remembered me. The technicians ran through their checklist. Telemetry green, stability confirmed, sensors locked. But there was one problem, same as before. The system wouldn't initiate. No launch sequence, no internal activation, just a quiet passive hum. Alive, but unwilling. They'd tried everything. Resetting modules, overriding encryption, bypassing the original compiler verification. Nothing worked. And now they were out of ideas. That's why I was here. Not to restart it. To prove something. To them, to me, to the system itself. That I was still here. That this machine wasn't a ghost of the past. It was living proof. They handed me the old tablet. Clunky. Scuffed from field work. Booted with a flash of blue and the same login screen I'd built 5 years ago when we still thought we were building for glory. My hands hovered over it. And then I did what I always did. Not command, not override. Just identification. A line of code. A key phrase. A fingerprint pressed against logic. And the system blinked. Not dramatically, not like a movie. Just acknowledgement. The screen turned white. Then green. Then the fin shifted slow, deliberate. The kind of movement you don't program. The kind you calibrate over months of intuition and trial and failure. The machine knew me. And for the first time since they cut me out, it chose to move. The technicians stared in silence. Then one whispered, "Why does it only respond to you?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know. Because the answer wasn't technical. It wasn't about encryption, or versioning, or some rogue kill switch. It was about trust. The machine had been built with conditions, boundaries, and a kind of mechanical integrity that rejected lies the same way a body rejects poison. They tried to fake continuity, but continuity isn't code. It's connection. We ran one full trial, 30 minutes. Every function passed. Motion, evasion, lock and return. It flew perfectly, smoother than I expected. Not because the system had gotten better, but because it had been waiting, holding back, refusing to run until the pattern matched the origin. Not a defect, a design. After the flight, I handed the tablet back. Didn't speak. Didn't shake hands. The system had already said everything. Not with words, with performance, with fidelity to a blueprint no one else fully understood. Because you can copy a product. You can't copy a bond. And when a machine learns who it belongs to, you can't trick it with clearance or contracts. You have to speak its native tongue. The one you taught it. The one it remembers. As I walked back to the van, I didn't feel triumph. Just stillness. The kind that comes when a ghost finally recognizes the living. The system was awake now, and it wasn't theirs anymore. It never had been. The offer came 2 days later. This time formal, printed, stamped, hand-delivered. It wasn't just a contract. It was a reversal. They were no longer asking for consultation. No more side doors. No more liaison or special advisor titles. They wanted me back. Full integration, joint patent lead, oversight authority. And most importantly, they offered to rewrite the project history. A clean record. My name restored as if it had never been erased. I laid the folder on my desk, didn't open it for an hour. Just stared at it. Let it sit under the lamp like a lit fuse. Because I knew what this really was. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a transaction. An admission, sure, but one cloaked in legal phrasing and strategic retreat. They didn't want me. They needed me. There's a difference. When I finally read through the pages, I took my time. Clause by clause. Most of it was what you'd expect, non-disclosures, performance milestones, review cycles. But there were lines hidden in the margins, subtle attempts to retain control. Language like, subject to program redirection at executive discretion. Rights of co-authorship extend only to approved deliverables. Historical attributions shall not be construed as ongoing authority. Clean paper, dirty fingers. They wanted my signature. But only on their terms. And for a long time I thought about it. Not out of desperation, out of strategy. Because sometimes re-entering the room means more than revenge. It means reclaiming what's rightfully yours. But not like this. Not with borrowed words, not with borrowed truth. So I didn't sign. Instead, I wrote my own document. 4 pages, titled, Terms of Return, by the original architect. It wasn't written in legalese. It was written in code. Not syntax, principle. Clause 1, full restoration of authorship, past, present, and future iterations. Clause 2, no usage, replication, or modification without active co-signature. Clause 3, any breach triggers total access revocation via existing logic gates. Yes, the ones already in place. Clause 4. Public acknowledgement, not press, not fanfare. Just a simple internal memo sent company-wide with my name. They don't have to apologize, but they do have to remember. I sent it off. No cover letter, no explanation, just the terms. Let them feel the cold, clean edge of their own mistake laid bare in structure they could no longer pretend to control. The next morning, I got a single-line reply. Accepted. Full compliance pending internal alignment. No emotion, no attempt to save face. Just confirmation. Because finally they understood. This wasn't a favor. It was a condition of continued function. Their system, my rules. Funny thing is, I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was balance. Like a fault line that had finally stopped shifting. Like a machine that had clicked back into place after running hot for too long. I didn't go back to the lab. Didn't pose for photos. Didn't stand in front of a screen and say, I told you so. I just resumed access, quietly, exactly where I'd left off, like I'd never been gone. Because in the eyes of the system, I hadn't. And from that point forward, anytime someone touched a line of code, they knew who had written the first one. Not out of fear, not out of loyalty, out of truth. And truth, once verified, doesn't need to raise its voice to be obeyed. Sometimes systems remember what people forget. They don't do it out of sentiment. They do it because they were designed to. Because memory to a system isn't optional. It's structure. And that's what I was. Not a name on a contract. Not a role on a resume. I was structure. Months passed. The system went live. Controlled deployment. Limited test scope. It worked. Of course it did. Because it wasn't built to impress. It was built to endure. And now it moved with the rhythm I had embedded in its bones, a logic older than its current name. Older than the rebrand. Older than the betrayal. It didn't need to prove anything. It just needed to keep moving. And it did. Every turn, every lock, every evasive pattern. A ghost in motion, not haunted but remembered. They sent me the performance report. 118 pages, color-coded, fully annotated. I skimmed most of it. But one line caught me off guard. Buried in the notes from a junior engineer, barely a sentence. It still drifts slightly left at low altitude. But I guess that's just how it was always meant to move. No attempt to fix it, no rewrite, just respect. The kind that doesn't come from command. The kind that comes from knowing. I sat with that line for a long time, because it told me more than any contract ever could. That somewhere, someone had realized the difference between operating a system and understanding it. Between using an invention and remembering its inventor. Sometimes I wonder how many others out there are still waiting for the system to speak their name back. People who built something real only to watch it get claimed, rebranded, twisted. But the truth is, even if your name gets stripped off the door, even if they pretend you were never there, the architecture remembers, because fingerprints don't wash off steel, and ghosts don't leave when they built the house. So if you're like me, if you've ever handed over something you created only to be told you don't belong in the room anymore, don't let them write the ending for you. Subscribe to this channel, not just to hear how the story ends, but to stand witness for every builder who was cut out of their own blueprint. There are more of us than they want to admit, and the only thing louder than code is the quiet force of someone they thought they deleted, still writing the next line.